Hi, and welcome. I'm going to give you some feedback. This is for the questions that you had to do for Chapter 1. Just so you know, for this course, this is how I'll give you feedback each week, either on your questions or your problems. What I'd like to do is cover them and add some insight into the problems or questions. And then if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions, I'd be happy to speak with you. You could email me. You could come on the WIMBA session and ask a question. Give me a call. So I want to use this as the baseline to start with, and then obviously from there, if you have any questions or would like to discuss it further, I'd be certainly glad to do that. So what you had to do is look at the questions for discussion this week for Chapter 1. First question asks you, what opportunity cost did you incur in reading this chapter? Pretty much any opportunity cost was what did you not get to do because you were reading. So there are many things you could have done with your time instead of reading this chapter. You could have been sleeping, you could have been eating, spending time with family, shopping, watching TV. So the most desired activity you gave up is the opportunity cost for reading the chapter. Question number 2 asks in figure 1.7, government failure causes output to fall below its full potential. How might this happen if government intervention moved the mix of output from M to X? Would this be government failure? So when we look at this question, make sure you turn to page 18, because on page 18 it does give you figure 1.7. And here you can look at the output of consumer goods compared to the outputs of military goods and how many units are produced per year. So point X is the optimal mix, which is pretty much even between consumer goods and military goods. The point of the graph is that government intervention doesn't always improve economic outcomes. So it can result in some inefficiencies that cause production to fall short of its potential. So if we move the mix of output between points M, which the market outcome maybe has more consumer goods produced than military goods, to X, that is getting closer to the optimal mix. So government intervention can shift the market from that to more of an optimal mix. Third question asks, for fiscal year 2011, President Obama proposed increased military spending by $30 billion. What's the opportunity cost of this spending? The opportunity cost would be anything that you're not spending it on, whether it's education, healthcare spending, whether it's additional funding for Social Security, Medicare, those types of things. The second part of the question asks if it's worth it. And economics doesn't answer the question of whether or not it's worth it. The theory doesn't try to determine whether it's too little or too much. It just wants you to see the foundations behind the theory. So really it comes down to perspective to say whether or not it's worth it. There will be some that believe that the military spending is worth it because that's their opinion and their beliefs. There are some that are going to think that the other opportunity costs lost are going to make it not worth it. So in economics, you're not going to find a solid answer to that question. You're just going to be given the theory and trying to look at the principles behind the theory. Next question asks, what public or private sector output would you cut back on in order to make resources available for healthcare? This is what we call a normative question. And really, there's no right or wrong answer to it. You may have all answered differently based on how you feel should things be cut back. So you may feel that military spending should be cut back, or education spending. Really looking at the budget, and you could pick a number of things that could be cut back, or you might feel that we shouldn't be spending more for healthcare. So economics really wants to identify potential cuts and different opportunity costs that can be, but they don't make a decision or doesn't tell you what is best. Number 5 asks why it might be necessary to reduce consumer spending in order to attain faster economic growth, and would it be worth the sacrifice? So basically what it's looking at is if you cut back on consumer spending and making consumer goods available, more investment can go into capital and looking for the long term. So if we look at using the resources to produce consumer goods, or whether we should produce capital with those same resources, what can happen is economic growth may become if you can produce more capital. So as a result, it may be necessary to reduce the output of consumer goods so that resources are available to produce more capital goods. Basically, if you're not spending it on consumer goods, you're putting that into kind of investments to make, maybe it's better machinery, better factories, more education of your workers, things like that. You're investing so that you can have more economic growth in the future. As far as would it be worth the sacrifice, again, that's relative to what your values and beliefs are, but most would say that you should sacrifice now in order to have more future consumption. Question 6 asks, if auto emission controls weren't required, would people willingly buy and install them? Well, would you? So let's say that you're not required to have emission controls and you're not required to get any sort of inspections for emissions each year. Would you go above and beyond what you need to do in order to protect the environment? Some people would, and this is a priority for some people, but most probably wouldn't, is the sad truth of it. So if you're not required to do things like that, most don't. So people prefer to spend money on things that give them direct pleasure. So if you're buying these controls, you're really not getting any direct benefit. It's just better for the environment in general. And this is one case where government intervention does come in, because without it, most people would not choose to spend their money to help with pollution. Question 7 asks, why doesn't North Korea reduce its military and put more resources into food production? This is headline 11, which is on page, I'll pull up the page here real quickly for you. Page 11, I'm sorry. Top of page 11, it's in the blue box. Basically, they don't reduce their military and put more resources into food because the government believes that a large military established is for the better of their well-being and security. And basically, it comes down to the people in the government making this decision of whether or not where they want to put their resources. So the optimal mix can be different depending on where your values and beliefs are. So the answer to this question, it really depends on, in this case, North Korea believes that they should have more guns and military than necessarily food for the nation. Number 8 asks in figure 1.8, why can't we produce at X2? So let's turn to figure 1.8 in our chapter, and this is on page 23. It's the very top of page 23. Basically, point X2, if you look at it, it's right next to X3. It's off of the blue line. Will we ever get there? The answer is no, because basically all of our resources are mapped out on this chart, or the graph, and anything that we can do falls where the blue line curves down. X2 is beyond the resources available for production because it's outside that curve. So the only way we'd be able to get to point X2 is if we could increase our resources. Now, I shouldn't say it could never happen. Thing is that there are some resources we can invest in and try to get more from. There's some that we can't. So if you're talking about land, there's only so much potential for land resources. The same thing with all of our factors. So in order to get to that point X2, there'd have to be some measures taken in order to increase the resources available. Question 9 asks, if taxes on the rich were raised to provide more housing for the poor, how would the willingness to work be affected? What would happen to total output? Well, it has been shown that the more that if you would tax, so say in your situation, whatever you're making now, you decide to work harder, work a little bit longer hours in order to make more money. What if the government came in and said, well, that extra money you're making, we're actually going to take it, and we're going to now provide more housing for the poor? What happens is that would you really be willing to work 5 extra hours a week if all of that money is going to be taken from you to give to poor housing? What happens typically is that you do reduce the incentive to work. So your willingness to work gets reduced because why should I work more if I'm not going to be getting the benefit of working? The other thing that could happen as a side effect is poor people might work less if they realize they can get free or subsidized housing based on the less amount of income that they have. So really what happens, the total output, both the rich and the poor tend to not have as many incentives. Therefore, the total output typically would be reduced based on people having less willingness to work. Question 10 asks, why is public confidence in government so low? And this is on page 19. There is a little headline box. And how can government failure be avoided? So the graph that's provided on page 19 just shows the confidence and trust in government. And really, you can look at this from many different ways. Um, Typically, when the economy is down, or other highly visible events such as Hurricane Katrina happen, um, confidence in government is reduced. No form of government is perfect, and what happens now is we have so many telecommunications and media outlets and the internet that can highlight any of the failures that happen, that overall the public confidence tends to be lower. So it's impossible to really avoid government failure because there's going to always be two sides of every event. So, in the case of Hurricane Katrina, the efforts of the government were focused on certain things. The things that they couldn't focus on, that's what got highlighted. So you can hope to minimize government failure, but it really comes down to how much information we know and we hear, and what perspectives people have. So again, if you'd like me to further discuss any of these questions with you, I'd be glad to do it. We can talk about it on WIMBA sessions as an open discussion, or I can one-on-one talk with you about any of the questions as well. Thank you and have a great day.